The Return of Green Sun Zenith.
Next on Eternal Turtles.
Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Dirtle Maniacs. If you want to be a Dirtle Maniac, go to patreon.com/eternaldurtles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with the show. Hello and welcome to Eternal Dirtles. I'm your host, Zach Clark. Phil is out this month and a half, and we have two guests today. Our Green Sun Zenith bros, Mark Strassman, Strassdaddy, and Dukes of greensunzenith.com. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
It's nice to be back.
Yeah, it's a blast to have you guys back. It's almost about this time last year, I think. You guys were on. It might have been a little bit later, but yeah, we. So this is a State of the Union for Green Sun Zenith.
All right.
How do we feel about Green Sun Zenith lately? Good. I'm assuming.
Yeah, I'll let Dougal kick us off with that, and then I'll chime in.
Yeah, I think to get them out of the way, I think the combo versions of the Green Suns decks, like Depths and Cradle Control, are doing really well. But from a Maverick perspective, I was actually looking at the stats for Q1 this year, and there's been one top 8 for a challenge through Harry, and then 2 pretty solid finishes in last chance qualifiers. But otherwise, yeah, not the typical kind of multiple finishes in challenges that you see. So a lot of League 5-0s, I think in leagues, the deck's doing really well across most archetypes. You got Mark on Punishing, you got Harry and Achilles on Abzan, you have people like Clips for Life on green-white builds. So there's a lot of diversity in terms of how you want to play the deck and if you want to do well with the deck. But yeah, just not the same sort of results we're seeing on a challenge front.
You know what is a good idea actually, because it might have been we've got a lot of new people, obviously, and they might not actually know exactly who you guys are. So let me give a quick who you guys are, and then correct me, right? So Dukes, you run greensunzenith.com, but you also you basically only play Green Sun Zenith decks, but mostly Maverick, am I right?
Correct.
Yeah. And then Mark, you play Punishing Fire Maverick decks.
Correct.
All right, great. So now there's a lot more nuance to it than that. So I'd like you gentlemen to fill in the gaps a little bit there, because being a blue player, not a lot of the people that watch us probably are used to us talking about non-blue decks. So maybe a quick overview of what Maverick is.
Let Big Dog take that.
All right. I would say Maverick is typically a green-white based creature orientated legacy deck that aims to both disrupt the current format and some of the top decks within it, and also pressure most decks out of games through combat damage. So obviously you have the tutor effect of Green Sun Zenith, which typically gives you 5+ virtual copies of green creatures within your deck, which is pretty great. So you have some pretty solid silver bullets, or cards that are very good against certain decks and not very good against other decks. Like Collector Oof, it's probably the biggest hate bear right now. At a pinch, you can Green Suns for it, which is really nice, and hopefully have some game against those faster artifact-based decks. Or you can play a pretty fair plan through Knight of the Reliquary, which you also have built around somewhat with your lands, and lands that Knight can tutor up. It's a really cool deck to play. I think so, because it's very fair. It doesn't do anything too busted, but it does keep the format in check a little bit. You still have to respect Wasteland. You still have to respect a lot of the Green Sun's targets, especially on a Storm deck. Grape Shot does that really well, sadly. But yeah, it's kind of a fairer way to play Legacy. It doesn't have your Brainstorm, Daze, Force of Will, but yeah, I think it gives users a really good way to interact with the format in my opinion, a more enjoyable way, which is through creatures. But that's just me.
So here's a question. So you have Green Sun Zenith decks, which are Maverick decks, which are generally blue and white, but occasionally, blue and green. But occasionally you're splashing either black or red, and rarely, I think sometimes you will splash blue. What cards in those other colors do you tend to use?
Okay, so the green white deck, primarily you can just stick with green white, especially many years ago. Nowadays, I'd say it's less common. I won't make a quality judgment about it. I think black has taken over as the most common splash for many years at this point, with the most success and the most fan base around it. Red is something that outside of Pyroblast has not been too popular. Punishing Fire is a great option to this day, in my opinion, but in the community's opinion, not as much. There's been some experimentation with cards like Fury and some cool versions, playing multiple Molochs or even Fable for Theolingus and things like that. The blue splash, I've seen my buddy Carador do really well with it, playing Daze and other things. And even a lighter blue splash, Dougal got a trophy with playing some blue cards. So I think all of them are viable. It's probably just player preference and or meta call.
This episode is brought to you by Tales of Adventure. Go to toamagic.com and use the code DURTLES for 5% off your order. You'll be directly supporting the show, and you'll get the entire order in one package. No more waiting for several packages. That's toamagic.com, code DURTLES for 5% off. So I guess one of the questions is, one of the things I always think about when you're playing this deck is, what makes that choice, right? Like, so you decide that you want to be on this deck for reasons, right? Like you come across like, okay, I don't want to be beholden to playing the blue fetch package, the cantrip cartel, as it were, and you don't want to necessarily play, Storm, right? So what's the mindset there? Like when I guess what I'm really asking is, when did you guys both decide that Maverick was the personality type that you decided to go with?
I really like a challenge, and I like to say that Maverick is playing Doom on like brutal mode when it comes to Legacy. And yeah, I think it's tough because I think if you are playing Maverick, you have to come into a league and know that you're going to lose to turn 0 combo with a force check decks, which is fine. And a lot of the unfair decks are just going to kind of get above you. Maybe even the value decks are going to get above you as well. But yeah, it's definitely a really cool challenge. It's very if you make an error in turn 1 or 2, you can definitely come back and see where that snowballed into a loss on turn 10 or 11. So it's very unforgiving. And I think that's a really good challenge, especially if you're streaming it. That can be an extra layer of focus. You need to focus. But yeah, I just feel it's nice. Like you don't have the outs that a lot of blue decks do. And I think with that, you have to play really patiently, be very direct with like what your plan is. And if you go off that for a turn or 2, then that might be the time that allows your opponent to get back into the game. So yeah, I think it's like the focus you need to bring to the deck. So it's a big one.
For me, I grew up playing against blue decks. My brother played blue decks. So, growing up, like being the younger brother, you're getting killed by counterspell and you hate it, and later on, when I got back into it in middle school, the card Counterspell was always a legal type 2 card, or standard card. and every deck pretty much had to play it. And I resented it. There were a few decks that got away with it that without playing it, but by and large, it was blue decks, blue decks, blue decks. When I first started playing Legacy, I played Paper, and I kind of got into it through playing Burn. And then little by little, I collected things for Goblins, because that was like the next kind of budget deck. And then eventually was able to work my way up to getting some dual lands. And my buddy proxied out Punishing Maverick, and I liked all the singletons that were in it. And when I look at the deck now, and I think even Depths is this way, nearly every card you play has like an activated ability or a search to it. There are no Delvers that you just turn sideways. There are no DRCs that you just turn sideways or Murktides. Even your lands can be tutors if you play things like Saga. Every card does a thing, and you feel such a high level of agency on the game that just what Dougal was saying, where, you know, there's an obvious misplay, like, oh, I didn't play a land, that was so stupid. But then there's like I opted for this line instead of this line in a given matchup. That's more of it's not like a clear mistake. It's just like a thing you see. And sometimes you may be a little harder on yourself, and you know, you died because you took a certain line and it wasn't necessarily wrong, but at least you felt like you had agency in many of the games, and that's what keeps me coming back, is that challenge.
A good example of that is against the preordained Delver decks, where they would go something like Delta into Underground Sea or Volk into preordain. I would typically try to get Collector Oof or Gadok Teeg down the following turn if I could, through like turn 1 mana acceleration, so I don't die to combo. But then when they play something like Delver or a DRC, it's like, oh, I've totally got this matchup wrong. And that's pretty much costed me like that. Like the Gadok Teeg has some cards that turns off, but if you get Collector Oof, it's just a 2/2, and it's obviously one less Green Suns you could have used for something like Endurance. And they're the points where it's like, that's going to cost me. And 10 turns later, that's probably what did cost you.
Well, I feel like that's one of those things where you have to like match that up to like your overall, right? Like the number of times that you made the right choice against decks that would have punished you for not doing that, you have to like look at the bigger picture there and be like, well, yeah, I lost to that one Delver matchup, but like, yeah, I got a Collector Wolf against an 8-cast deck, and it just like completely stopped them. And I did that blind, like coming up with the read. You got to think about your read as like, a big picture kind of thing, I think.
Yeah, and even to a lesser degree, a matchup like Goblins, let's say it's Goblins, modern sticker Goblins, the choice is there to say turn 1 Accelerate or turn 1 Wasteland or leave up removal or play Knight. What you often can tell yourself, or play around Blood Moon, which is a big one, because if you fetch a basic, you might not be able to plow later if you have to get a forest. You get to pick and choose what you play around. And if you're really aware, and if you're really into it, and you woke up and ate your Wheaties that day, you probably will make some really good choices based off of what you see, what your hand can beat. If you can't beat them getting 6 mana and playing, Muxus eventually, then you just don't play around that. You play into the things you could actually beat. Land's a very similar matchup where perhaps you need to let your guard down to lose to a 20/20, but you're going to play a Scavenging Ooze to not lose to the Loam. Being able to pick and choose your lines with all the tutors and how you tap your mana feels really good. The bummer is when, I think most people complain about this, when it's like turn 1, kill you, force a will back up, or turn 1, kill you, grief, take your thing, everyone hates it, but our deck is especially vulnerable to that.
I guess a good angle would be looking at the current decks, right? Like you just talked about Riskaminator, the Grief deck. There's Delver, there's Goblins, which is just kind of like popped up over the last like I don't know like 6 months. Riskaminator is relatively new. Delver's always been there, but you have cards like Orcish Bowmasters now, which you famously your deck shouldn't care too much about, maybe getting your bird or whatever, but like spending 2 mana to get alpha 1 mana things not as big a deal for you, I think. um what would you say that your deck is the predator of? Like when you're going after a specific deck type, like Maverick is there to police something, right?
One deck currently, I would say, that I'm very happy to say has been doing really, really well in challenges is lands, which I think Maverick has a pretty good time against. Obviously, being another reliquary deck, a deck that also can produce mana through creatures and not just lands, which, Tabernacle and cards like that do come up, but I typically find that against the lands-based strategies that don't have great removal options for creatures, especially the green-white versions. So obviously no Punishing Fire, which does deal with some small threats, but usually players will get a knight to a 3/3 or similar to play around Punishing Fire. Swords in the green-white builds typically in the board as well, which is nice. And there's only 4 of them. But yeah, we just have so many good ways through, Scavenging Ooze, which has made a comeback, Endurance, another Reliquary, just good pressure. And also, Maverick being a mana denial deck, a lands deck, notoriously has poor mana. So even a card like Collect Oof, which isn't really a card for lands, just lines up really well against Mox Diamond, which typically is one of their first green sources for a keepable hand with lands.
How do you guys feel about for lands that like new 10 what is it 8/8?
Mega Sloth.
Has anyone? I guess you guys play mostly online, so no one's seen it, right?
Dougal has.
Yeah, not online, but I have made a version in paper, and I've seen a few run around Twitter. Typically, you're going to see it, or at least what people are trying it in, is Turbo Depths, where you kind of have it as a plan B, or a slower version of Turbo Depths, which still plays a few copies, and then obviously plays more Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, because it gives you just the turn 2 Sloth with Dark Depths. Which, is tough because obviously if you're spending removal on the Sloth and they have the 20/20, it's pretty tough. But I think, again, against Depths decks, we're quite favored because we do have Wasteland for the 20/20 and then Swords for the Sloth in this case. But having Trample is pretty big as well. It's kind of like Troll, where it's going to be probably a 3-turn clock. And kind of comes down similar to Troll. Turn 2 in sort of the best cases.
What Troll are we talking about?
The one from Lord of the Rings.
Troll of Khazad-dûm. Okay.
There we go. Similar clock.
I was like, what? I was like, is Hogak a troll? Let's try to figure it out. That's interesting. So I want to go back to my original question, though, is Maverick is preying on a specific kind of deck. Mark, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll say the version of the deck is a pretty big thing. So let's go classic green-white Thalia, right? No one plays Bowmasters in this world. You're probably pretty good against most combo. Like most not Oops All spells. You're probably pretty good against Show and Tell. You're probably pretty good against... I don't know about Doomsday. Maybe Dougal would have something on that. I haven't played it since Doomsday came back. But I think Thalia probably pretty darn good there. Also...
Doorkeeper Thrall probably also pretty good.
Yeah, Doorkeeper Thrall really good there for sure. Storm, I think a lot of people would say, especially not like the Rite of Flame version of Storm, like cantripping and trying to find it. So I'd say that was like a really good one. Lands, like Dougal said. And then after that, it kind of gets tough. Like Harry's version, I guess I'll say that. I shout out to Harry1232, Harry Hackett, who, by the way, I got to hang out with him recently, and my buddy Dreadnought, John, who plays Depths, used to be a Maverick player. I'd say Harry's version, and correct me if I'm wrong, I do think with the Bowmasters and things like that, has a pretty good combo game. I think it's overall a very solid deck. And I think it's pretty good against Delver. And probably decent against Reanimate. Probably struggles against the God Hands, but you do get the deck's like a little bit slower than like Black Red Reanimate. The version I play with the Sagas, I really do feel like it's very good. It's pretty good against the Reanimated. It's very good against Goblins, believe it or not, with Punishing Fire. The Sagas are pretty good against Control as well. St. Catherine's changed the arithmetic a little bit on that. I'm still figuring that out since that came online. And I'd say Blue Red Delver. I like Harry's version, not my version as much.
I'm going to get your guys' lists, and I'll get Harry's list too, and I'll post those in the link below.
Yeah, he's really been working hard on that. He's probably the most successful online player at this point with the deck. I think it's hard to argue that. Achilles used to play a lot. And I think as far as challenges go, just a little sidebar here. I don't think Dougal and I have made much time for challenges. I think if there's a paper event local that's like probably 1K, 5K, like we're probably there. But the challenges I haven't seen Dougal do too often, and I haven't done them too often. Harry and Achilles, they're gamers. You know, if Achilles is into it, not doing his grad school thing, the dude's there. He's good, knows how to play. Harry's doing leagues, really into it. Good player, getting the reps. So I think part of it also is the community who's really doing it. You know, I'm playing a lot. I'm getting a good amount of 5-0s, but you know, usually paper is where the big events is where you'll see my name or Dougal's name. Yeah, so I just think the deck, as far as preying on things, just really depends on the version. Because I think that the versions are pretty darn different. Like Death and Taxes I beat up on, but I hear a lot of Maverick players complain about it.
Well, so let's talk about your guys' particular journeys with Maverick as far as content creators are concerned. Because you both have your own specific channels where you play Maverick. So I know, and Dukes, and you have the whole website as well. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, cool. The website was actually a work project. When I first started off in a position, my boss thought it would be good for me to understand how to actually build a site and asked if I had a hobby. And I was like, okay, we'll do this. So that was pretty cool. And yeah, I guess I was a big fan of, The Source, Salvation, a lot of forums like that, even Reddit. I would see the same questions coming up. Which I think is a big thing about like Thraben U as well. He sort of saw questions come up and answered a lot that he's like, I should just have some way to host all of this at once. So that was a big part of it. The Discord as well is obviously really popular. And I think is kind of trending towards a lot of the information within Discord just being much more viable because you have the person there. It's not too hard to search through Discord. And the Maverick Discord's really active and also welcoming, which is fantastic. But yeah, I've got back into getting more fresh content on the site. It can be tough doing like say, Saga or Punishing Mav deck tech or like Primer, when that deck does change pretty often with little tweaks. And could even be something where I do like a monthly like update, which is something I do for work, where it just gives you like an update on the trend and like what's seen play. Like a recent change, fairly recent, that Harry 1232 made, which is really good, is that he moved away from Renegade Relia, which was kind of a sacred cow, kind of gave you like the Wasteland lock, made sure you're making all your land drops, and moved towards something like dropped Ramanap Excavator and has moved towards Renegade Relia because it's quicker and you're getting back the land, typically, sometimes a Wasteland, the turn it comes down. You don't have the time to untap with Ramanap and then start Wastelanding. So just... yeah, I think his understanding of the deck, the time he puts into it, and, being able to make cuts like that, a little bit like Newton, is really cool to see. So yeah, I think from like a content perspective, it's good to showcase what other players are doing. And one thing that's very important to me is that just because I have the website, just because I play the deck, doesn't mean I'm some master. I'm just another Maverick within the community who's trying to put up results for people to talk about. Because I think there's a lot of cards you can fit in a Tudor style deck, and getting results with those cards is probably the first thing you need to do to really convince people that this is the way.
I'm going to stop you. You're a good player. I watch you. You're worth learning from. Absolutely. More than just a friendly face with a website and a Discord server and a great stream and a good
great
YouTube
channel too. Yeah, like I love tuning in. It's like the calming voice of my day while I'm working. I like put you on in the background sometimes and just like, manage projects.
That's nice.
Yeah, you're a big deal, man. Yeah. I want to give a shout out too on that website. Had me on there recently. I know the username Casey Gregor. I think Gregory, guys from Kansas City, took the time to write the patience that it takes to take your thoughts and condense them in a distilled way so that you have a reader who doesn't always have to deal with the fluff where in my content, as an example, you have to watch the video, you have to try to understand the deck tech. Having that for people who enjoy that is really important. Different minds. I'm more the type to watch a VOD to try to learn it. But the patience and the dedication and getting new blood in there. And really just like kind of like Joe Dyer in a way, just giving people the spotlight to kind of be like, hey, check out this person. See this list? Isn't this creative?
That's one of the things I like about Joe's content. It's brass tacks. You're just getting exactly what you want. Like, here's the deck list. Here's a quick blurb about the deck list. Here's what's going on. On to the next one,
Yes, and it not only is it useful for people to learn, but like I'm telling you that has made so many people feel good and want to strive to be on there and to check whenever they play something spicy to see if it gets a shout out, and people like that are so important. So big shout out to him. What a force to have in the community.
Heck yeah. Joe Dyer, everybody.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your channel a little bit.
Yeah. So mostly Twitch since the pandemic. I would occasionally I'd play paper. At this time, Achilles was streaming, which was really cool. He would do like entire challenges. And I wanted to create an environment with song requests and silly sounds and a little less serious. And I'm also like, I'm not playing a tier 1 deck all the time because I'm always playing Punishing Maverick, whether it's bad or good. I've delved a little bit into a few other archetypes that are kind of more like homebrews. Like I built like a Jun deck that I was kind of inspired to, a breakout deck. But it's mostly just like a Nick Fit occasionally. But it's mostly, I feel like I'm there to try to connect with people. I have a story maybe we can get into about going to an LGS recently. Yeah. But like I realized I genuinely like people. I really do. I miss that human interaction during the pandemic, and the cold interface of MTGO just didn't really do it. And meeting people and getting to know other members of the community, people coming in and being friendly, and
the gathering.
Yeah, the gathering, so important.
Yeah.
And that's what's kept me coming back. I do have a YouTube channel. It's mostly just VODs put up afterwards. I've done a little editing, but mostly the VODs, nothing against that. But I think the edited content creation that you do is also very important. Instead of, you could find a million VODs everywhere, but as far as like actual, discussions and deep dives and things like that, I think are a totally different level. And last,
Just a different skill set, I think. It's just two different. Like I can't be on camera for 4 hours.
No. Yeah.
People are gonna be like, did he just pick his nose? What just happened?
I've gotten good at that, and I think Anurag Anzid on Twitch, a true professional that way. Not only does he do a lot for the community and like events and stuff, but just talking from a sheer content thing. I'll halfway have a thought, and I'll be like, yeah, so I think oh shit, dark ritual, and then like I forget. Like Anzid's really good.
I do that
at like stop, look at the camera, say my thought. Da 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 da. Okay, back to the game.
Yeah,
it's a skill set.
One quick note.
Sure, Dukes, you were going to say something.
If you look at Mark's MTG Goldfish player profile, on his page 1, you'll see 19 5-0s with Maverick, but then you'll see 1 5-0 with Beseech Storm, which I think also shows range, which is great.
Oh yeah, that was that time when you just went to the dark side for like a day, huh?
Oh man, so for those who don't know, MTGO will sometimes give free cards for a period. Like you can not rent, but you have an unlimited collection. And my buddy Mike Eureka Online said you should try it, and he was kind enough and patient enough. He was super sick too. I think he had he was like bedridden. And he had the patience to like type through cast dark ritual, then blah blah blah. Like who the hell has the patience for that? And I got a 5-0, a little bit of agency, but definitely a lot of help from him. And yeah, by the way, that deck is harder than I thought.
Yeah, it's not just cast dark ritual 7 times and then cast Past in Flames and then win the game.
It's not, but if you watch Tony, especially Tony, a cook too, but like, I don't see them counting. I swear
they just know.
Yeah, and I don't think that they know that they know. They're just like, I've seen this before, and it's worked out, and it's like a pattern.
Yeah, I used to play Blue Red Storm in Modern, and I just wake up in the middle of the night having like math nightmares. But yeah, you just get to a point where you're like, okay, I have these cards in my hand. I've seen these cards in my hand before, and this equals 20 Storm. Like I can do this now. And that certainly playing the modern version is the much more like on hard mode, Doom Brutal mode, if you will, of Storm when you're playing it like that. I just actually, and I'll talk about this more in detail when he's on, because Bryant Cook will be joining me in a week or two. I just did a tutoring session with Bryant over the last a week ago. And man, that was brutal. Like just having somebody that's like so much better than you sit down with you and just be like, "Yep, here you go. Just want to point out this thing that you did. Just need to in a constructive way for sure." But the confirmation bias I got of like I just go too fast and don't think about my plays. I just do it like I gut react to like every single thing that happens in the game. Having somebody like I respect as a player. Sit down and go, yeah, exactly. This is exactly what your problem is. It was a nice. It was enlightening,
That's really nice. I think Mark can probably appreciate this as well, especially when you're streaming. You'll talk about the line you're going to take. You know it's the correct line, and then you just do something different, and you're like, why did I do that? Why? Like you talk about maybe like removal, and okay, I'm going to turn off Orcish Bowmasters by taking off their black source, and you wasteland the Volk, and you're like, I just threw it, and then they untap and they Bowmaster you, and you're like, we even just talked about this. We just did this. Yeah, it's brutal.
Yeah, I think the real, if you want to get good, and that's important to you, it is having the discussion about when you did this, were you thinking about X, Y, and Z, or maybe you ought to do that, and having that and not having thin skin about, well, you did that, therefore you're stupid, and trying to die on the hill of my line was right. If you can, and this is true of many things in life, I think, if you can have the the constructive conversation about like, because maybe they're wrong, maybe they're right, and maybe you didn't think about it, or maybe, you know, they're not saying it to be mean, especially trusted voices. But I think you have to have that discussion, especially when you're learning, and even when you're not. Like to this day, people will be like, "Hey, did you think about this?" That's really the way to get better. Community is big, yeah.
And shout out to Bryant for like on top of that, like he's a well-known content creator. He does that game well also, and just being able to get like that feedback. You know, we're on Discord together, so I'll share stuff with you guys occasionally that like I'm learning as I go along, and like kind of getting that like behind the scenes look at somebody who like knows what they're doing is like really cool sometimes, and like that to me was also like a really cool part of the process was just getting to see like what are the thoughts behind this or that. And like I think one of the big leg ups I got was when Phil took a break last year. Bryant was on in his place, and we were just talking about thumbnails and stuff, and he was like, "Oh yeah, this is how this is done," and that like changed my whole perspective on the YouTube game. Like that was like a really cool thing. Getting completely off the Maverick talk for a second, but like it's really cool to like when you're hanging out with people to get like that sort of idea, especially because it's a shared hobby, Magic. But there's so many other things going on in the background too, especially like there's more, it's more than just, 30-40 minutes to make a video, like, so I think that's something that's like really cool and that people don't like really think about it when they're like consuming content.
I agree.
Yeah, for sure. I'll definitely also say thank you, Brian, to all the help he's given me, even unsolicited, where I've asked a question on Twitter and he sent me a direct message with like all the info that I've needed. It's like, thank you. That's really nice. Especially as a new father as well. Like time is of essence.
Jeez. Yeah, that was part of the deal with the tutoring is just like 7:30 I can be there. Before that, the baby's not down.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll give him a special no thank you for killing me with Red Flame before I could untap. But
that was the worst part of the tutoring session is I played Storm and like I was playing like Grixis Delver, but I ended up going against Storm and he's like, "You're dead, Zach." He's like, this guy's playing the best deck in the format.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, one time he came in the chat. He does it often, but he came into Twitch and he said to me, "I don't think you've ever beaten me before." And he could have been right, but I had to say, no, I'm pretty sure I got you once. Just like reflex. I think I got you in paper in the year 2011 in a comic book shop that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Something like that. And then the next time I played him, I got him.
Ah, there you
go. Felt good. He jinxed himself.
I never talk about it.
Yeah.
Mostly because I'm going to lose anyhow 9 times out of 10. I did my bonehead move of the week was I was at a local Saturday, and I'm at 3 life, and I'm playing 8 cast, and I decide that I can go down to 1 against my Dimir Scaminator opponent by playing a what the hell is it? Phyrexian Metamorph and paying the 2 life to keep 1 mana up for an Aether Spellbomb, because I was like, if he puts like a Trax in or something, I can just bounce it and then untap and kill him. And then he just drew an Orcish Bowmaster and killed me. I was like, why did I do that?
Been there.
Yeah. Taking a moment to like have those like honest moments with yourself where you're like, yeah, I just have to like I have to learn that lesson and do that better next time. And that was my winning in for the tournament, and I had like 1 more winning in after that I blew. But like I was like, you know what? Like I didn't deserve it. Like if I'm gonna make a small mistake like that, and it's gonna get me, like you just gotta be honest with yourself about like why you lost and like learn that lesson.
Yeah, introspection's tough, man.
Yeah, like it sounds a little bit cliche, but you learn a lot more from a 1-4 than a 4-1.
Very true.
I will say
actually.
it's also on you to learn during the 1-4 and not just be like, it's just not my day, or it's just that's consistency. It's like, no, there's probably things that you could work on, and if you actually spot them, then you could turn that 1-4 potentially into a 4-1 the following game.
Yeah.
No matter how good you are.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm still trying to pull off is like we were just talking about parallels. I just downloaded Parallels. I just got back onto Magic Online. I haven't played Magic Online like 5 years. Is like learning how to just do Magic Online. You know, like the number one, the number two, the number six. You know, all that stuff. Uh, you know, just trying to figure out like the ins and outs of that on top of like relearning the format, because I think that's one of the things that like Phil and I both have discussed a few times is the concept of like old man Magic. Like we've played Magic for a very long time, and we kind of got set, especially during the pandemic when we weren't playing as much. We kind of got set into this like, I want to play a format that doesn't exist anymore, right? And then if you want to be honest with yourself and you want to do good, you have to realize that like you kind of you don't know as much as you think you do, and you're gonna have to learn to okay, I have to get my reps in one, but I also have to learn to play against matchups that just didn't exist 5 years ago. Like I have to evolve with the cards.
Yeah, that's. How about this? I'll ask Dougal this, and I don't know his answer. In Who's the Beatdown against Blue, Red, Black Delver, where do you feel like you are on that? And how does that change?
That's a good one. Against Grixis, I typically find I'm trying to answer their threats. So I would say I'm the control deck. So typically, if I start off, I think that it really comes down to my Bowmaster answering theirs instead of theirs answering mine. Because I want mine to stick around, of course, but I also want to incentivize my opponent to play theirs first, probably killing a Mana Dork or something like that. But yeah, typically against Grixis, because we're in black and have more removal, I find I'm throwing threats into days more than removal, but I'm also trying to keep their board as clean as possible. So I think by keeping their board as clean as possible, that puts me in the control part of it.
Think about how different that is than like the Canadian Threshold days, where it was like a very clean, like, where the control went away. And how like the Bowmaster problem, as an example, like I feel like just like what you were saying, where like not only are you learning to play against different decks, I think the matchups in certain cases have totally flipped. Control, especially 4 or 5 color control, is now a wastelandable deck, which it wasn't. Changes the way you think about it. Delver, for me, game one, who doesn't play Grist, I feel like it's a race to endurance so that I could or plow Murktide once, and if that resolves, I win. But if it doesn't, I lose. There's this whole Murktide like Soul Guide Lantern thing that happens where you're like, do I just blow the Soul Guide now? And I don't think I play it as well as some other players do, which is a weakness of mine. I do believe that. I think, yeah, so it's not just that there's a new deck. It's also that like the decks have changed. Like Cauldra, I used to not mind if they untapped with Stoneforge Mystic so much. Now it's a big deal.
Now you need that Haywire Might.
Yeah, now I have that answer. You know, it's like it's so many things are different. So I think if you play maybe even Lands now has Saga, and that changes things a lot. So I think if you think about Magic since before the pandemic, it's just it's a very different game. I really feel that way.
Yeah, 100%.
I also feel like, in the Grixis versus Maverick matchup, it's a little more even as far as Delver versus Maverick is concerned. Whereas, like, I used to just roll when I played Rug Delver, I just roll over and play dead as soon as I saw a Knight of the Reliquary hit the board. I'm like, I guess I just lose. I feel like now there's a little more play, right? On the end of the Grixis Delver player, right? There's with Murktide Regent helps a lot. Like when your Tarmogoyf is a 8/8 flyer, it's a little bit easier to run around.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
One little level up is I found most of your flash creatures don't have flash in the Delver matchups. Like play your Endurance on your turn and play your Bowmaster on your turn. If you take out a creature, that's great. But a lot of the time, if you're trying to like get them by holding it up, it's going to backfire.
Yeah. A friend of mine said that once about Legacy is like, stop trying to do draft tricks.
Yeah.
Oh, like
That's a good one.
Stop trying to do like combat tricks to like, that was a learning moment for me. They're like, you're just gonna get hit by a daze when you're not paying attention. Like you gotta play around that sort of stuff. But I would always be like trying to get the value, like, oh, I'll Snapcaster and cast this, but also I'm gonna hit this thing and the guy like dazes and all I have is a Snapcaster on the board. Stuff like that,
Yeah, a lot of matchup dependent things. There's also like moments where you're like, you got to think like, do I need to take the risk to win?
Yeah.
Or am I going to win anyway?
When to stop tapping your unlicensed hearse for graveyard removal and when to start attacking with it.
That's a big one. Yeah, when to attack at night.
Yeah, perfect example, actually. That's a better example as far as Green Sun's decks are concerned, right?
For me, the answer is like almost never. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say a hot take is Maverick players play Script Ranger, so you don't have to think about that.
Yeah. Like, I'll just untap him anyhow.
One other matchup that Mark was talking about, I think, is Beseech the Mirror Storm and how it's changed, how good Collector Oof is. That now, if you turn off the artifact, it's only kind of doing half the job because they can just beseech it away and win that way, which is like, wow, okay, well now Oof by itself is definitely not enough.
You need to be attacking the graveyard too, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Endurance might even be better at times. Teague is probably better too, which it used to be often opting for Oof, I think, for most against most Storm decks.
Yeah.
I think also on the subject of playing MTGO earlier, I played Paper recently and sucked at it. It's hard.
What's an example?
Yeah, it is hard. Just getting the strength up to turn the card sideways with your hand.
Oh,
you get carpal tunnel.
Would you do, Mark?
Okay. I'm sure you have some too. First thing first. On Magic Online, when a spell is on the stack, you can hit 1 or hit OK. In Paper, you could go, okay. But if you're not like looking at your hand and like thinking, like, what does OK mean here?
Yeah.
The life total, very hard to track. Opponents accidentally, by the power of suggestion, cheating. Great example. Cavern Harpy is a card that Aloran plays, so you don't see it very often. My opponent said to me, play Cavern Harpy targeting Bowmaster. Without reading, I go, oh, this is a targeted ability. I'm just going to shoot the Bowmaster. The thing is, it's when it comes into play, it doesn't target, sort of like Entomb, not Exhume. Is that the one? Exhume?
Exhume,
the one
yeah.
Yeah. So it's a black or blue creature. Yeah. So it's like little things like that where I say okay and don't understand what I'm even agreeing to. And then also like, do I want to be the asshole who calls the judge and has this like argument of semantics in a tournament? And like, this guy's like kind of learning to play the deck. Seems like a really nice guy. Like, we were just joking around about some silly stuff. Like having the killer instinct, I don't know if I have it anymore. Like, especially at the local tournaments, like maybe, if I'm like winning in, but even on the winning ins that I've had, like I remember I had this moment where instead of comprehending a card, Goblin Engineer, I didn't take the time to read it because I knew that time was short, and I deep down understood that I probably could have stalled this game to a draw, that I was likely going to lose. And I felt an internal pressure to not do that. Where on MTGO, your clock is just going. It was like a moral dilemma. And I'm like thinking about this guy, and I beat a dude who had like a thick accent. And I was like, this guy just, came to the country, and he's like, doesn't speak much English, but he's playing Magic. Like, I don't want to be an asshole to that guy.
Yeah.
Like, it hits you different. At least it does me. I don't know if you have the same kind of experience, Hugo.
New Doomsday players. I never know. Like, I fluster myself when I'm about to bring something up. So I hate confrontation. I never bring it up, but I'm never sure like how to go about, especially a Doomsday pile, like how much time you give them. So I typically just give them as much time as they want without being too long. But yeah, I'm not someone who's like 30 seconds in, like, yeah, okay, we got to go. Like, you should know your piles or something. Because
I have a hard rule about searching your deck. If it's this is a mental rule. Like, I've never told my opponent this. For Doomsday, if it's been more than 3 minutes, I'm going to be like, hey, man, what's going on? 3 minutes. Like, that's the time it takes a sideboard. You should be able to pull this together, right? Or you got to learn the deck better. That's on you, not on me, right? But for like regular searches, if somebody takes over like 30 seconds to find to like rock a fetch land thing, I'm going to be like, bro, what's going on? And I have that Jersey in me where I can just be like, hey, what are you doing here? Like I have a little bit of that, so I can, I'm like, hey, I'm from Philly, like, but the Midwest part of me takes over too sometimes, and I feel bad about it. So yeah, I think, navigating the social construct that is Magic the Gathering can be tough. Yeah.
It's intention. If they are slow because they're purposely being mean, I feel a certain way. If it's just, somebody's new to it, they're trying to figure it out. I'm at a lucky point in life. I'm making decent money. The only thing I really care about at tournaments at this point is really not the money. It's ego and community. It's
the prestige.
Yeah, whatever the hell that's worth.
Yeah.
Why do we do anything? But like, yeah, I got second place at a pretty big tournament. I haven't gotten first at a very big tournament, and that's something. But I think even if you do that, like, what do? I just like retire? Like, no, like I'm going to try to get first at 2 big tournaments, like.
I remember getting first place for the first time in like high school at like, like a local, and feeling like really cool about it. And then I like went to high school and was like still getting bullied. I'm like, nothing changed. Nothing changed. Apparently, winning a Magic tournament does not make you cool.
Everything.
And that was a big life lesson for me, I think.
Yeah. So you think it's going to be like that part in the movie where all of a yeah, like even your enemies start clapping
right now. Yeah, like the guy, like Johnny comes over and he's like, "You're all right, LaRusso."
Never happens. It never happens.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about, though. Yeah, I 100%. I just you win that first tournament as a Magic player, and you're thinking like everything's going to change. There's going to be some aha moment where you're like, you're good. It's like the end of the grind. You're just like, yeah, I'm gonna they're gonna sign me now. No, that doesn't happen. You just keep playing Magic, and you have to keep playing Magic as best you possibly can. Actually,
yeah, you wake up as you, no matter what.
Eternal Dirtles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy, and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
Question for Mark.
Sure.
Blueback Scam. Blueback Scam is a deck you play against. I typically play against it once or twice every league. Popular deck. The deck obviously uses the graveyard in some way through Reanimate and Animate Dead, typically. They're the only 2 ways. And boarding for them, I see a lot of players throwing around different strategies. Some bring in Graveyard Hate to target those creatures. Some bring in extra removal. I've definitely bounced between, but I'm coming out of the tunnel as a player who just likes to bring in more removal, because if you top deck the removal, you're going to be answering on board threats. If you top deck the graveyard hate after they've got the threat into play, it's kind of dead. But it's also kind of nice to just turn it off. Like, say, Grief is better to turn off in the graveyard than let it ETB, but the Troll doesn't really mind in a way. Do you have any thoughts on Scam? And if you bring in Graveyard Hate, or if you're more like, no, I'm just going to let them get things on the board and then enter them on the board?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first, the version I'm playing, typically 4 Endurance, 1 Ooze, 1 Soul Guide Lantern. The Grave Hate that I bring in is really Bog and Pyros, because I wouldn't even call Pyros Grave Hate, just protection. And a Veil of Summer's been like a new addition. So I think Bog is like a definite. I've played ley lines in other decks and have lost to getting my own creatures reanimated. It was like Nick Fit. I'm like, boy, do you have some big dudes you don't want to see on the other side of the board. The 3/2 Grief with Punfire is something I feel confident at beating. If they go like Grief, reanimate Grief, I'm relieved.
Yeah, what are they going to do? Take your Punishing Fires? You're just going to put them back in your hand?
Yeah, I could kill a 3/2. Like I'm going to draw something most likely, and I have a Shadow Spear or something if it really gets ugly. I'll say, okay, a little bit of a roundabout answer, but remember when Breakfast was like a top deck? So they had Orum's Chant and they had Teferi. And then players said, I'm not going to play Surgical. I'm going to play Fairy Macabre because it's an activated ability. It gets around those two. That's pretty advanced Magic tactics. For me, I played a Granger Guild Mage or a Pirate Spellbomb as an example to have a permanent base threat to get around that because I didn't want to play more Grave Hate. I don't know the switcheroo yet for that deck. Clearly, Ooze is the type of card you want because it's, big on both ends. My guess is probably Fairy Macabre is probably the answer. But maybe not Leyline. Maybe Fairy's pretty good. I think the issue with that deck is, it's going to you really are afraid of both plans. But my ultimate feeling is I usually, in at least Pun Mavids, I usually die to Reanimate. I usually don't die to a Bowmaster and a Grief. And if they reanimate the stupid 6/5, I can beat that too most of the time.
Yeah, nice. Reanimating your own creatures is a big threat because I know, especially with Thalia, which has kind of moved down to just being a Fiend Artisan target in a lot of the Abzan decks, rather than being a 3 or 4 of. When they were 3 or 4 ofs, some players played Solitude as a way to make use of multiple Thalias, because now you could pitch them. But playing Solitude over a card like Path to Exile opens you up to reanimate on your own Solitude, which can be really tough, because you might be able to Solitude one of their creatures, but then if they Solitude or reanimate the Solitude, it just opens you up to okay, well now I'm going to deal with this. So it was really interesting to play Solitude, which takes typically no mana, which is great. But then when it gets reanimated, you're like, okay, I didn't really think about this from a sideboard plane.
Yeah.
Or Grief. Oh, not Grief, Grist.
Yeah, Grist is makes the board really yuck. Yes.
It is so hard to beat that card, especially turn 1.
Coming from an Infect player's perspective, that card is the worst.
Mm-hmm.
I have a similar answer about this. I know you didn't ask, but I played in a 1K yesterday, and I played Scam 3 times, and I won the first match. I tied the second one, and I lost the third. And sort of the thing that I noticed about each of my opponents, one, they were reanimating my stuff. So Kappa Cannoneer, they get a 5/5, and then like they kind of just like, okay, that sucks, I guess, but like we can figure out ways around that. But the thing that I noticed is that they were siding out a lot of their targets. Like they keep their trolls in or whatever, but they get rid of their Archon and their Atraxa, and they're like, well, I'll get rid of for me, they were getting rid of their reanimates and using animate deads only because of Chalice. But I found that they're often their first instinct is to side out a lot of their graveyard style stuff and then like just play the fair game against you. And their fair game is often just good enough if you draw 2 or 3 sideboard cards that are irrelevant in that match. That's at least the vibe that I was getting from each of my opponents. And afterwards I was talking to them about it, and like, yeah, I just did this because I figured, you'd bring in this and then you wouldn't have anything. And of course, like it worked out for 2 of them.
Nice.
I was just going to say, I think it depends on the player. Like,
yeah, for sure.
I played against Arkin, and I think very good player, Legacy Council on Twitch as well. But if you look, Arkin currently the trophy leader as of today, and the ability for him to, I want to say, make those high level choices at the sideboard level. And when I brought in Leyline against him to have the right pivot, I do think maybe Leyline is too heavy, but maybe endurance isn't, or something like that.
Yeah, because you could actually attack with endurance.
Yeah,
like having a Fairy Macabre in your hand is all well and good until your opponent just starts casting Orcish Bowmasters against you, and they've got like 4 guys on the board, and you're like, well, I was just waiting for you to reanimate something, right?
Exactly. It's I think what has to happen, and if I start gaming enough, I'll have a better answer. I do play a good amount, but when the Breach deck was really big, Underworld Breach, there was this card called Cindervines that I was playing at the time. And Cindervines was kind of like a disenchant that also was a counter to that deck because it's sort of like a pyrostatic pillar on a disenchant. And other players were playing this like 1 mana Green Sun Zenith target that whenever like a instant or sorcery goes to the graveyard, it gets exiled. I feel like with more time, I believe you're going to see more niche cards come up. I've seen a lot of weird counters for goblins. I remember Snuff Out wasn't a card that was getting a lot of play, and now
Dryad Militant.
Yeah, Dryad Militant. There it is. That was
pulling that from Dukes. That was not my. that was a text message that Dukes sent to me.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, that card, like those are the kind of aces that I'm talking about that I think will start to come up over time.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Well, so gentlemen, let's end this with a question. So you've seen some of Thunder Junction. We've got a little bit more time left before the whole set spoils. Have you seen anything interesting from Thunder Junction spoilers yet at all?
I don't think so. I've seen interesting cards, but not for the deck.
Well, what looks interesting card-wise?
There's this one card that kind of reminded me of a Weathered Wayfarer. It was this white 3-drop, and I think like when it enters the battlefield, you get to search your library and put Plains cards into play, and you repeat that process until you have as many lands as your opponent.
Oh.
Weathered Wayfarer was a card that got a lot of play when Maverick
Claim Jumper, apparently. Claim Jumper, that's the one. Okay. That card, if it had Flash, would be super good because you could do it with like fetch lands on the stack and wastelands on the stack and things like that. Oh, yeah.
There's an inside joke. So Oko, if you see him in the set, he's got his like shirt open and he's like looking like extra jacked and everything. And there's a Simpsons skit where Flanders goes up to Homer and he's skiing, and he's like, looks
Stupid
like I'm
sexy
wearing
Flanders.
Stupid sexy Flanders. So it's been like stupid sexy Yoko, and like that's the joke in there. I don't know how good it is, but I can't help but think of that whenever I see the like open shirt Oko.
Dude, you see anything from the new set that looks interesting?
No, I sadly haven't had time to look at it. But my piece of advice for players who do see something interesting and want to bring it up in discussion is bring up the card, bring up why you think it's good, and bring up what you would drop from a list to fit it in. Because I see a lot of people saying like, oh, you should play this card, or why don't you play X? And I would love it. I love the YouTube comments who are like, hey, you should play this card instead of this because it does X, Y, Z. And that's like where the meta is. And I love that sort of discussion instead of just, oh, this card's cool. Let's play it. It's like, but where does it fit? That's the big part. Like, what do you cut? It's like, oh, well, that's your job. It's like, no, it's not my job. I want to know what you would cut. So, yeah, that's my rant.
Tiny Bones? I thought.
So Tiny Bones is a legendary 1-mana 1/1 with Death Touch. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you can cast a non-land permanent card from that player's graveyard, and mana of any type can be spent to play it. That's a pretty interesting card. 1-mana legends are interesting just because, like, will we ever get to that point where, like, Mox Amber is playable?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think of Ragavan, but I think if lands gave you some value, like if you could play their fetch lands, I think it would be like super good. The fact that you can't, I think, is the downfall. But I remember looking at that and thinking maybe there's something with that card that, but is Reanimate just better? So could be.
One quick one. Surveil lands. Mark, how have Surveil lands been for you?
That's a good question. That's been probably the latest change. So I've played 3 of them, and I've played 1. I also thought the synergy between Scrib Ranger, where you would bounce a land, a forest, back to your hand and replay it, would be pretty good. When Legola's Quick Reflex, or however you say that card, came out, I had an instinct to try to go like, hey, let's also play Maze of Ith, because you could get, you could attack and you could do all this cool stuff, and let's play Scrib Ranger to try to maximize it. The good thing about Surveil lands, I'd say, is they're good enough on their own that you don't need the added synergy of Scrib Ranger if you're not already playing it. I think at least one is correct. I'll admit I was incorrect on the card. I thought like Triomes, as an example, are cards that I played and played enough reps with it where I said like, not worth it. I thought it would be in that camp. I think it is better. Harry, at the moment, who I had a decent discussion about it, I don't think he's on a lush Portico. I think he's on either black-white or green-black in his version. What the correct 1/2 run, if you run 1, is it your green-white, or is it your green X, or is it your white X? I don't know. But I think that's probably the area of exploration. I'm confident 1 is correct, at least. Is it more than 1? And is it which color and why? I'm not sure. What about you?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Depths. Should Depths play him? Because John's not playing him.
Yeah, Depths is an interesting one because you do have to find the space for it. That's the big thing. And you find with especially Silencia Depths, you see a lot of the mana bases the same. I've been liking the green-black one just because it is an additional black source, which against the decks that you want it against typically run Wasteland. So having a black source there is good. It's got some cool tricks. Newton's had a few moments where, say, an Orcish Bowmaster has tried to take out a 1/1 Fiend Artisan. You fetch for the Surveil land, you surveil a creature into the bin, and the Fiend Artisan becomes a a 2/2. It also sets up situations where you can save a 2/2 Knight of the Reliquary with a fetch land after a bolt, because the fetch goes to the bin, you get the Surveil land, you surveil another land, hopefully into the bin, it becomes a 4/4, which is pretty fantastic. Little things like Ooze, you can surveil a creature into the bin if you need it. If you're playing multiple Grists, there's a line where you could potentially tick up Grist, put a Grist into the bin, and then Grist again because it's an insect to get an extra insect, which is kind of cool. But yeah, I really like it because it is card selection, very similar to Once Upon a Time, and having some control over the top of your deck is pretty fantastic at a pretty small cost. The tapped land coming in tapped does come up here and now, but overall right now I've been loving 1 in the deck. Yeah, it's been cool. It's always cool to change a mana base as well. Typically a mana base isn't changed too much.
For me, I added a 27th land over because I was like running 5 mana dorks and dorks died at like Bowmaster. So I cut a 5th mana dork, went 4th, and ran 27th land.
Nice.
Did you cut a dual land, a fetch? I think maybe Horizon Canopy might have been on the chopping block, perhaps.
Yeah, Canopy is getting tough because the 1 damage over time really adds up if it's in your opening hand. And obviously with Bowmaster, it can come back at you. I believe I cut the 5th Jewel. I typically run 2 Bayou, 2 Savannah, 1 Scrub, and cut a Bayou for the green-black Surveil land, keeping the 8 fetches because it turns on Renegade Rallier. And yeah, it keeps me within...
Did you fit it?
Not yet, no. But I could see it taking the spot of... I typically run 5 Jewels in 3 color decks, so I could see it, say, being the Taiga, the second Taiga, probably over the second Savannah. I really like, in Maverick, 23 lands and 3 Once Upon a Time seems to be the going rate for Abzan right now, with anywhere between 4 or 5 mana dorks. But yeah, Depths is an interesting one, especially the faster versions of Depths where it might be a little bit too slow for you to set up. You really want to keep hands with both pieces of the combo. So if you're not doing that, then what are you looking for? Maybe protection. That's probably the answer. But
I have to say, I'm surprised that your guys' choices were to choose a green X land for those and not to be like, well, the green land is what we don't want coming into play tapped because we want to play a mana dork early on. So just having the utility of that land is like the off-green one. Again, I don't play the deck, so just a thought process I had as soon as you asked.
Yeah, when Mark actually said it could be the white-black land instead of, say, scrub land, that's kind of cool because sometimes you do want white and black on one land, and it doesn't return with Scrub Ranger, which is fine. It still sacks to Knight because it's a plains, which is cool. But also having like an extra green can really help if you're going for like Hold Up Endurance or Scavenging Ooze. But yeah, I think there's definitely more work that I could do at even trying out it in like the non-green version of a tri-land.
Yeah, for me, I figured less about... I put it more like this. Wishful thinking, I'm not going to draw it. Turn 1, I don't have a play, and I'm going to fetch. I probably want that fetch to be a Savannah. That was my thinking of, I don't have a turn 1 play, and Savannah's the best land in the deck, so let's make it a Savannah. I think the version that I ran was Scrub Ranger and Yavimaya, the one that makes everything forest, was really cool because I was able to like do cool stuff with like Saga and Scrub Ranger, where it would go up to like chapter 3 and then you could put it back in your hand and get more mana, or like use Saga with Knight when it's on chapter 3. And there's some cool footage of me doing that, but like, is it good? Yeah. But also Shadowy Backstreet. Every time I say it, Shadowy Backstreet Boy. So just putting that out there. Might be the right one to play.
All right, gentlemen. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on. And we got to do this more often. We did this like a year ago. I think I need more time with Green Sun Zenith. One, I just want to actually try out the deck. So maybe I'll hang out with one of you guys on stream one time and just like kind of go over plays and stuff. I think that would be fun.
Let's do it.
But with that said, thank you everyone for watching. Thank you Dukes and Strass for being on, and we'll catch you everybody next time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
For the gift that keeps on giving all year round, join our Patreon at patreon.com/eternaldurdles. And hey, check out this playlist we got up here with all of our interviews over the last couple of years. Some great people from the Legacy community, some really great guests.